This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So we will soon find out. Let's begin at the beginning, guys. Let's first talk about the ancient world. So in the ancient world, today you have like secular people who aren't religious, who don't believe in God. In the ancient world, that was a non-event. No such thing as secular in the ancient world. In the ancient world, everyone is spiritual, but all the religions, until we came along, are polytheistic. What's polytheism? Yeah.
More than one God.
Belief in many gods, right. Every force in nature, the essential idea behind polytheism is that basically there's a world full of gods who are anthropomorphized. What's anthropomorphized? That's a great word to know, yeah?
It's when you use words to reference God.
Well, it's to make in the image of man. It's like to make gods in the images of human beings, more or less. And every force in nature had a god that governed it. And more or less, everything else is a variation on that theme. Obviously, you know that line, the Eskimos have like 30 words for snow or something like that? So if you lived in the mountains, you had a mountain god. If you lived in the desert, maybe you had a sand god. You know, the Egyptians had a Nile River god. But the idea was that the gods sort of existed. I got two whiteboards, I have my choice here. The gods sort of came out of some primordial stuff, meaning there's something pre-existed. They weren't always around. They're immortal, but not in. What's immortal mean, as opposed to being infinite? Immortality is that you are born but don't die. Gods are born too. Gods are born. They're procreated. You know, like gods, and they have babies or half babies. Like Hercules is a demigod. You know, like the demi-tasse cafe, thing. Half god. He has one parent who is and one parent who isn't. And the only difference between us and the gods is what? What's the difference between us and gods? If you don't remember your mythology, which most of us learned as like literature in 10th grade, or you read the Iliad, just think of the X-Men. Like Storm, Magneto, Wolverine, Marvel Comics, by the way, all created by Jews, you should know. I mean, Superman is so Jewish. His father's name is Kal-El. Gotta give me a break, it's not too obvious. What do the gods have that we don't have? Yeah.
Is it immortality?
Immortal, and one other thing.
Powers?
Superpowers. But otherwise, they're just like people, only worse, actually. If you read mythology, it's better than a telenovela. I never watched telenovelas, but the few times I've seen them, more things happens in a half hour of this show to these people than happens to most of us in like 3 months of our life. How many crises can you go through? Look at Thomas Bulfinch. He wrote a very famous introductory text to mythology, and here he's describing Norse like Viking creation stories, because all of these polytheistic faiths have creation myths, like where did the gods come from, where did the physical world come from. They're all variations on the same theme. So if you look at quote number 1, they, Odin, Vili, and Vi, slew the giant Ymir, and out of his body formed the earth, out of his blood the seas, of his bones the mountains, of his hair the trees, of his skull the heavens, and of his brains the clouds charged with hail and snow. Of Ymir's eyebrows the gods formed Mirgod, Middle Earth, destined to become the abode of man. Now what does that sound like? No one's a Tolkien fan here? What's the name of where all the hobbits and everyone lives? Middle Earth. You can see where Tolkien lifted it right out of. But the point is that some primordial thing like a giant turtle is broken up and the physical world comes out of it, and the gods exist in the world with you. The difference is that they being superhuman and immortal, but it's sort of like a feudal state, where the gods are like the nobility and you're the serfs. And your job, what is serf's job to do? What's serfdom about? Yeah, semi-slavery and?
Yeah, I was going to say slavery.
Serving. Your job is to keep gods happy, because if gods get upset, like Poseidon goes hypoglycemic on you because you didn't give him a steak at the right time of day, then he sends a tidal wave and drowns your city, that kind of thing. But not only that, so you're like a putty in their hands. The essential, I always say, if you look at Greek mythology, like Euripides, like tragedies, the whole essential plot of all Greek tragedies is the futility of fighting against your fate, because your fate is not in your hands. What's going on down here is a manifestation of what's going on up there. And therefore, they took this very seriously. We laugh at this today, but it was a serious thing in the ancient world. You never went into a battle without, checking with your priests and your augurs and your omens and you go somewhere and look at some bones or some tea leaves. You got to make sure that the gods are on your side, and you make sure you offer right sacrifices so your gods are happy with you, because you view that anything going on in this world was really a micro version of something going on over there. which means the gods would sort of cynically use and abuse you for their own use. A great example for those of us who remember is the Cold War. I long for the days of the Cold War. It was such a great period of time. When you had an enemy who was an atheist and didn't believe that nuking the universe would get them anything because they didn't believe in life after death, much better than a bunch of 12th generation Shiite Islam guys who think that unleashing Armageddon brings their Messiah and 72 virgins. They don't realize they get one 72-year-old virgin. By the way, if anyone's curious, I'm not going to say it on film. Ask me after class what a female suicide bomber gets. Pretty shocking. Anyway, she gets Yasser Arafat. No, we'll talk about. If you really want to know, ask me after class. Now you're all going to think about that the whole class. But you remember during the Cold War, because they used to have this thing called MAD. What's MAD? M-A-D. And remember MAD? Who's Pam? You know, remember MAD? Yeah, very good. Mutually assured destruction. That both the U.S. and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the whole world 1,000 times over, so they could never afford to fight each other directly, because the consequences would be cataclysmic for the human race. So how did they fight their conflicts? It's called proxy war. Whether it was North Korea, or Vietnam, or the Cuban Missile Crisis, what was going on in South America with the Sandinistas and all, even Arab-Israeli conflicts from 73 on were proxy wars between the U.S. backing Israel and the Soviet Union backing Arabs. And after taking 50 years to get them out of the Middle East, thanks to the past president, Russia has scored the greatest strategic military victory it has scored in a quarter of a millennia. Not only is it back as the defining factor of this, I'm getting into politics, I should stop. But not only is it back as the superpower of the Middle East, more so than America, but they now have a warm water port in the Mediterranean, something they've been trying to get since the Crimean War. Thank you to Assad. Anyway, that's a separate story. But so the gods fought their battle. So if any battle turned out here, it's really what was going on up there in heaven. Look at what's the most famous god battle that we know about in literature? The Iliad. Remember the Iliad, Troy? Troy really exists, by the way. They found the city. But the whole background to it, of course, is fictitious. But who read the Iliad? For some people, we feel like we're actually living at the time. It was so long ago. But look at the story in quote number 2. This is the background. It just gives us insight into how people viewed human affairs as a manifestation of what was going on up with the big guys up on Mount Olympus. This is, again, Bullfinch describing the famous story of Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships and sent the Greeks to destroy Troy. Minerva was a goddess of wisdom, but on one occasion she did a very foolish thing. She entered into a competition with Juno and Venus for a prize of beauty. Jupiter, Zeus, the Roman and Greek gods shared the same names, not willing to decide in so delicate a matter, by the way, thus proving that Zeus was a very smart guy. Can you imagine being asked to pick between 3 goddesses, like who's prettier? Sent the goddesses to Mount Ida, where the beautiful shepherd Paris was tending his flocks. To him was committed a decision. Paris decided in favor of Venus, thus making the 2 other goddesses his enemies. So that's the background to the whole war. Is a bunch of nasty, excuse the impression, bitchy goddesses having a beauty contest and getting upset, and then triggering a massive cataclysmic struggle between 2 great civilizations. Of course, how the battle turned out down on the planet Earth depended on what was going on up there. Minerva, who is Zeus's consort, girlfriend, wife sort of person, was on one side of the conflict and Zeus is on the other. So when Minerva wanted to win a battle, she needs to get Zeus out of the way because Zeus is a pretty strong guy. So what does she do? It's very, very human. She seduces Zeus. She invites him for a picnic, puts a blanket out in the field, gives him a nice glass of wine. He gets a little drunk. They then do their thing. Afterwards, Zeus does what all men do afterwards, falls asleep after smoking a cigarette with a big smile on his face. And when he's passed out all happy and buzzed, Minerva goes and wins the battle. Again, we laugh at this, but they took this very, very seriously. So now we understand pretty much what the ancient world was like. What are the moral implications of this? And this is the interesting part. The first book I wrote, I actually have a copy in here. Excellent book. You can ask Kirk Douglas, my oldest student. He's 100 years old now. You know Michael Douglas's father? There's a book everyone in the world should read, he wrote, see? The first book I wrote, which is actually my master's thesis, is about the impact of polytheism and monotheism on morality. And just to give you a micro taste of that, polytheism has huge moral implications. Every culture and society has laws and customs. There's nowhere you can go in the world. You go to naked Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert, there's rules to living in their society. And you go to the most sophisticated civilizations in the Western world, there are rules. Because without that, you have anarchy. That's how people learn to function together. But what was the deciding factor in how people, throughout history, wherever they are, what decided what was right or wrong? Think about it. How did it come about? What was easy, expedient, mutually agreed upon, the majority thought was the best? It's never based on an absolute standard. It's just that this is what we decide. This is what we've gotten used to doing, and this is now what's acceptable. Okay? So, by the way, huge implications for morality. As I illustrate in my book, and I talk about when I do a presentation on it in World Perfect, for instance, overpopulation is a big problem in the ancient world, straining the ability to supply your population with food. So how did they, before they had Planned Parenthood, by the way, an organization founded by a white suprematist named Margaret Sanger. Look at that one. That's another great topic for discussion. But before they had things like Planned Parenthood and birth control, how did they control population in the ancient world? You killed babies. Baby killing is a universal practice in the ancient world, considered to be completely acceptable and normal. Come on, today you hear about a woman killing a baby or a father. What a psychopath. And you end up with an ancient world that is, and again, read World Perfect or watch the presentation on my website, that is on one hand incredibly sophisticated but unbelievably brutal. And by the way, there's no connection in human history between level of culture, technology, and even law and order and morality. Some of the most law and order culturally developed civilizations in human history are the most brutal. You see it with Rome, where you had blood sport and infanticide and tremendous inequality and no idea of social justice, and was the most sophisticated civilization in the world, but also super into law and order at the same time. Okay, so you have a very different reality that's a direct byproduct of a world that believes that there's no such thing as absolutes in terms of morality, because what you think is right is what I think. And the ancient world was very multicultural. Not that people travel like we do today. Most people lived and died for generations within a few miles of the same house that their grandparents lived and died in. Really, think about traveling, what we do today if you travel around the world. But you just were open to everything. You swapped gods like baseball cards. But there was no absolute idea of any standard there. Into all this world appears one man we talked about before, whose name is Abraham, who was born in 1948 from creation. I always loved that, because what was created in 1948 of Christian calendar year? The Jewish state, yeah. Abraham from Ur, which is today? Iraq. We're all Iraqis, even if you look Ashkenazi. Somewhere back there you're an Iraqi. And Abraham, as I said in the introductory class we did, is great for two reasons. One, in a world that has lost connection with the infinite creator of the universe, he's able to think outside the box, radically transformative thinker, and reconnect to a completely counterintuitive idea of one God. And by the way, let's focus on one God for just a couple of minutes, even though we could spend our entire lifetime focusing on one God and not understand what it means. Because a lot of us have a very kind of puerile, like immature idea of one God, like we have one and you have a lot. It's a totally different thing. I remember I used to watch WWF, World Federation of Wrestling. Ever guys watch that? They used to have this French-Canadian wrestler named Andre the Giant, who unfortunately died. He suffered from giantism. He was 7.5 feet tall and he weighed 450 pounds. And he would wrestle 4 other guys at once. And he was bigger than all 4 of them. So a lot of people, their vision of God is like that. We just have one and you have a lot. I have people tell me all the time, well, we didn't invent monotheism, the Egyptians did. There was an Egyptian, Akhenaten, there was an Egyptian pharaoh who chose to exclusively worship Amun-Re, the sun god. And instead of ancient Egypt, where they worshipped dozens, if not hundreds of gods, he's not a monotheist. He's just a uni-worshipping of one god kind of guy. He just put all his eggs in one basket. Why spread it around? I'll just bet on the sun god as the strongest guy around. It's like I'm going to worship only Zeus. I'm not saying Minerva's not there. I'm just not. But the notion of an infinite God is so counterintuitive, because think about it. Otherwise, everyone would have thought of it. Why does the whole world create in the ancient world all these gods that are anthropomorphized and look like us? Sometimes they had like crocodile heads, but they're basically human. Because if you were going to create a spiritual world, you'd base it on what you see around you, a combination of humans and animals and whatever, and you'd give them emotional states and everything like us, only on a more grand scale, like royal scandals, that kind of thing. But to come up with an idea of an invisible being, when we talk about God being one, when we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that God is this one God. It means that God is, the better way of saying it is Ein Od Milvado, which some people put bumper stickers in their car that say that. What does Ein Od Milvado mean? There's nothing besides God, which doesn't mean there's no other gods. It means there's nothing besides God. That the only being that really is God, and not to get too metaphysical and Kabbalistic, go to Sfat and spend a weekend there and try and gain some more understanding of this, is that we, the entire physical universe, including us, are a projection of God's infinite consciousness. That we don't exist without God constantly willing us to exist, like a thought in your mind or a dream in your sleep. Like when you wake up, the dream keeps playing without you. You come back 12 hours later and just pick it up where it left off, like you left your TV on. No, it doesn't exist. The idea of infinity is it's basically impossible for a human being to even comprehend what that means. It's not like the number pi, which is unending. Like just try, and I always have the same thought. I get to the same time, every time I pray, I get to this thought, especially when I'm saying Shema, and then my brain can never get past it. You can say the words easily, you cannot get your brain around it. What does it mean that there's a being that always was? Like, what does that mean? Like, there's no experience in the physical world of something that always was. Everything is caused by something else. Like Immanuel Kant, the great great German philosopher, said, God is the uncaused first cause of everything else. So you have this radically transformative idea, which has huge implications not just for spirituality, in being completely different from everyone else in the world, but also huge implications for morality. Because now morality is no longer what the majority thinks is expedient or what is easy or cheaper to do. Morality, it comes from a source that doesn't need you to agree with them. It's an absolute morality, which is why some people like to call what Judaism is ethical monotheism. The belief in one God who gives us one standard of morality. Look at the Yehezkel Kalpin, famous Hebrew University professor, long since passed away many decades ago, in his book, The Religion of Israel. Quote number 3. The basic idea of Israelite religion is that God is supreme over all. There is no realm above or beside him to limit his absolute sovereignty. He is utterly distinct from and other than the world. He is subject to no laws, no compulsions or powers that transcend him. He is, in short, non-mythological. This is the essence of Israelite religion and that which sets it apart from all forms of paganism. Here you go. I'll pass those back to take it back. So, completely different idea. Now you have one standard of morality that comes from one being. Doesn't matter what you think. You know, said it the best. Dostoevsky has the greatest quote. Dostoevsky said, now I'm completely out of my brain, and I can say this quote all the time. I'll remember in a second when I stop thinking about it. He said, where there is no God, everything is permissible. It's a great quote. Where there is no God, everything is permissible, from a great Russian writer who hated Jews, but that's a separate point. The only Russian writers who liked Jews were Chekhov and Tolstoy. So, anyway. So guys, we see the difference in terms of theology and in terms of morality. Two radically transformative different views. And for 2,000 years, by the way, we will be the only people, from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Christianity, which is 2,000 years, we're going to be the only people believing in this idea of one God and one absolute standard of morality. So can you imagine, look at quote number 4. This is Ronald Green, Religion and Moral Reason. He sums it up beautifully. He says, when all prescriptions for human life are traced to God's will, morality obtains enormous authority. When the moral law is objectified as expressing God's will, therefore, the law ceases to be subject to any of the reason criticism provoked by regarding it as an instrument of human reason. Simply put, it doesn't make a difference. God doesn't care what you think about this. This is right, this is wrong in an absolute sense. It's not open to a vote. So, that's what, guys, for 2,000 years, it's us versus everyone. Now, again, in early history of the Jewish people in the Bible, we don't have any records of what people thought of us. We have only descriptions in the Bible of what happened to us. But once we get to the Greek and Roman period, which is the first period of human history, the Greeks are the first recorders of history, the Romans are much more consistent at it, and we're interacting with these huge pagan cultures, by the way, which are very difficult interactions. With the Greeks, with the Hanukkah story. The Romans, we rebelled more against the Romans than anyone else in the history of the Roman Empire. 3 major revolts in less than 70 years, including the biggest revolt in the history of the Roman Empire, Bar Kokhba, from 132 to 135. So if you look at what the writers of this period of time, the historians especially, say about us, there's like unanimity of opinion about Jews. They're totally bizarre and weird, and they're also really arrogant. Who do they think they are? Look at quote number 6. This is the famous Roman historian Tacitus in his history. He says, the Jews conceive of... go one further. Quote number 5. This is Philostratus, the life of Apollonius of Tyana. He's writing this like over 1,800 years ago. He says, for the Jews have long been in revolt. Keep in mind, this is almost 2,000 years ago. For the Jews have long been in revolt, not only against the Romans, but against humanity, and a race that has made its own life apart and irreconcilable, that cannot share with the rest of mankind in the pleasures of the table, nor join in their libations or prayers or sacrifices, are separate from ourselves by a greater gulf than divides us from Sura or Bactria of the most distant Indies. Remember that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? Like, we're from, like, the Mediterranean, Jews are from India, which is as far away in the ancient world as people knew about. Like, these people were just, like, so weird. They just chose to be totally different from us in their lifestyle and their beliefs. Quote number 6. This is Tacitus, the famous Roman historian. The Jews conceive of one God only, and with the mind only. They regard as impious those who make from perishable material representation of gods in their images, meaning any kind of idol. That supreme and eternal being is to them incapable of representation and without end. Therefore they set up no statues in a city, still less in their temples. And again, the language here is one of complete incredulity. Like, how could this be? Who are these people? Every temple in the world, if you went to, who is the patron goddess of Athens? That's an easy one. Athena. And the Parthenon, which stupidly the Turks stored gunpowder in and blew it up, but it was the most beautiful classical building probably ever. If you went to the Parthenon before it was blown up, what would you find inside the Parthenon? What was in the middle of the room? A giant statue of Athena. Because she looked like someone. She's just, of course, big, but same thing. So if you went to the temple in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, after Herod remodeled it, it was the largest functioning religious site on the planet Earth, which classical historians estimate that up to 1 million non-Jewish pilgrims would visit a year. Non-Jews. Before El Al. Even more amazing. And you went into the temple, which you actually couldn't go into the inner room of the temple. What was in there? By the way, the second temple, the Ark, which was in the first temple, was gone. But it was like, there's no images. And any bathhouse, any street, in the ancient world, we have no idea how ubiquitous idolatry was everywhere. Every bathhouse had statues of goddesses named after them. Street corners had idols in them. People walked around with idols in their pockets. They had altars in their houses. Then you come to the world of the Jews, where there's nothing anywhere, not even any decorative art in the Second Temple period portraying people or animals, because it might be construed as being idolatrous. So it was like going to a different universe. Like, who are these weird people? Quote number 7. This is the famous Roman historian Dio Cassius. He says, they, the Jews, are distinguished from the rest of mankind in practically every detail of life, and especially in the fact that they do not honor any of the usual gods, but show extreme reverence to one particular divinity. They never had any statue of him in Jerusalem itself, but believing him to be unnameable and invisible, they worship him in the most extravagant fashion on earth. This is proof that Dio Cassius must have visited the Aish building, gone to the roof, and watched one of those really wealthy Syrian families from, like, Brazil or Brooklyn doing one of those over-the-top bar mitzvahs. You got to go up there. The women wear shoes. If I could just get 10 of them to donate the shoes, I could buy a house for my kids. Unbelievable. So, but guys, what's the feeling in all these quotes? It's like, these Jews are just so weird. Like I said, in the ancient world, it was not a nice, tolerant place in terms of caring, and that's all stuff that comes from Judaism. It was a brutal, violent, callous place, but it was extremely open spiritually. I worship your gods, you worship mine. I go to your city, and you're an Athenian, and I'm from, like, the other side of the Mediterranean. We don't have Athena as our god. Of course I go to the Parthenon and make an offering to her. And you got these Jews who won't do any of that. But more than that, the Greeks and Romans were always at odds with us and actually went into physical conflict. Hanukkah was the first, religious ideological war in history. And imagine if you come from a world where you believe that everything that happens in this world is a byproduct of everything going on up there between the gods. And in all the struggles we fought, Hanukkah, we fought the Greeks to a standstill. They actually gave up after 25 years, and we won some battles in the beginning also. But with the Romans, who rebelled against the greatest pagan empire of Western civilization, who rebelled against more than anyone else, and how did all the rebellions end? Who won? Every one of them. The Romans won huge. It's a great PhD thesis. I believe that a higher percentage of Jews in the world died in those 70 years than Hitler killed in the Holocaust. Not numerically, but percentage-wise. I personally believe that 3/4 of the Jews in the world were probably killed out in that period of time. But massive revolts, hundreds of thousands of Jews killed each time. So imagine if you're a Roman trying to understand. Imagine I'm an ancient Hebrew and you're a bunch of Romans, and you're understanding. Let me understand ancient, weird Hebrew who worships this invisible God. You're telling me, according to your worldview, that my gods don't exist and I worship nothingness. And I go, yep. Then how come every time we fight you, we win? Where's your all-powerful God to protect you? It comes from a very kind of, again, puerile, like immature way of looking at theology, because they're looking at it like, I would answer back, idiot Romans. As a matter of fact, your gods don't exist. And long after you're in the dustbin of history, I'll still be around, which is true. And you have a relationship with your God like he's Guido the bodyguard, or the local mafia guy in your town, and you pay him off and he protects you. Whereas I have a much more sophisticated understanding of a very deep relationship with contractual I have with the infinite creator of the universe, and if I don't keep my side of the bargain, he doesn't keep his. And he's going to use you to punish me, which, by the way, doesn't get you off the hook because you still have the free will not to do his will, but that's too deep a philosophical discussion. But it's a very different way of looking at reality, but it puts us at odds with the world. And by the way, I always say, when you look at the struggle, which is the great ideological struggle, and Hanukkah was the first religious ideological war in human history. Look at quote number 8 from the second book of the Maccabees, which is not in our Bible, by the way, because it was written after our Bible was closed, and not written by a prophet. It's actually in the Catholic Bible, because they want to have textual continuity between the end of our Bible and the beginning of the Christian Bible. But look what it says in quote number 8. It says, not long after this is the background to what triggered the first religious ideological war in history, which is the Hanukkah story. Antiochus, the king, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, right, the Seleucid king of the Eastern Greek Empire and based in Iraq and Mesopotamia, sent an Athenian senator to compel the Jews to forsake the laws of their fathers and to cease to live by the laws of God, and also to pollute the temple in Jerusalem and to call it the temple of Olympian Zeus. By the way, the Romans will repeat the same thing in Hadrianic persecutions at Bar Kokhba. But like you Jews, enough giving up your stupid dietary laws. Why won't you eat with us and drink our wine and marry our women and worship our gods? Who do you think you are? We've had enough. We're going to go after you. So this is the first time it happens in human history. It goes on many, many, many times. As a consequence of all the revolts we have against the Romans, they destroyed the temple. We're driven out of our land. We're actually banned from living in Jerusalem. When it becomes Rome, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the first city in the world that was Judenrein, like officially declared Jew-free, ironically, is Jerusalem. And I always say, you ever heard the expression, they won the battles but lost the war? Guys, we lost the battles and won the war. Now think about it. What happened? Not only do we outlast all of these people who are gone today, it's pretty wild, but where's the paganism of the Western world? It's gone. What's the whole world today? Pretty much the whole Western world, Middle East Western world is based on, we're going to get to these classes later. We won. They left we won not exactly, but we won pretty much. They left their polytheism aside and adopted monotheistic faiths that come out of our belief system. Without us, there wouldn't be them. Who am I talking about? Christians and Muslims, for sure. So it's an amazing story. And again, I did it really quickly because, half the book, it's interesting, is about like looking at the ancient world and how brutal it is, and then comparing it to the transformative ideas that Judaism's brought in, like value of life, peace, social responsibility, education. All this stuff comes from the Jewish people, directly or indirectly. The second half is amazing. It's how did we, the most hated people on the planet Earth, without even a country for 2,000 years, manage to get the entire human race that hates our guts to buy into our vision of values? I mean, it's the greatest subliminal marketing victory of all of human history, is the story. It's not a huge point of Jewish pride. But let's put that on hold, because I only have a few minutes left. And I want to switch gears, and let's jump into the modern world, because the name of the class is Judaism, Paganism, Multiculturalism. So, by the way, I went to college I went to college BC, before cell phones, before computers, and before politically correct. Like when I learned history as a little kid, and we learned the history of the dead white guys of Europe, I call it. History of dead white guys of Europe, which was you learned about Egypt, because it's the forerunner of Greek civilization, and then Rome, and you did Napoleon and Alexander, and World War I and World War II. A, it's the history of power. B, it's the history of one part of the world. It's very Eurocentric. Because back then, in the good old days, when people believed in exceptionalism, which is totally out of vogue today, it's my next class I'm creating. It's a class on liberalism, exceptionalism, reticulism, because it's the hottest issue in the world today. That's what all it's about in America today. If you're liberalism, particularism, and exceptionalism, and universalism actually is the word. I lived in a world where there was clear black and white. There was evil Soviet Union, and there was America, and God bless it, and there was today, forget it. But then along came this thing, multiculturalism, politically correct. So first of all, look at the source of all knowledge after God, also known as Wikipedia. Quote number 9. And this is the definition of multiculturalism. Multicultural advocates a society that extends equitable status to distinct cultural and religious groups, no one culture predominating. It's a great point, by the way. Now, I would say my personal opinion on multiculturalism is mixed. On the side of culture, I agree with this. There's no such thing as a correct culture. Like, what do you mean your culture's correct? It's your culture. There's no such thing as like a correct style of dress. It's a style, taste in food. If the whole world had the same, imagine if the British conquered the whole world and everyone had to eat British cooking. It's like boiled pizza. It'd be horrible. Seriously. They have, and we all look the same. Well, the great thing about traveling around the world is you get to see different scenery and different cultures. That's amazing. It's the coolest thing. So there's no that, but it comes to morality, boy, I have a big problem with it. This politically correct multiculturalism thing, and by the way, I got it when I wrote this thesis. By the way, I remember this is I did my graduate thesis way after. I got this. I think 1995. I think I did this, and I graduated from Vassar in 1981. I took a big break in the middle. And when I graduated, I saw it coming, multiculturalism, but I didn't get there. When I was writing my thesis, they gave me a list. My mentor for my thesis gave me a list of words I couldn't use because they were gender specific. Like you can't be short, you're vertically challenged. Like this whole idea of you're not black or brown, you're a person of color. So is a white person. I'm like, what's a white person of color? I mean, there's no white people anyway. Actually, I have my graphic artist for my next book actually got a scholarship because he applied as minority Jewish, because Jews are 1.7% of the United States, African Americans are over 20%, but we're not a minority because all Jews are obviously wealthy and successful and never need financial aid. And excuse me, and I can't do that sentence. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. And so they rejected him. You're not a minority. So then his mother's Moroccan, born and raised in Casablanca, so he applied as an African American and got a scholarship. And of course, when they saw he was white, they wanted to eject him from the school, and then they couldn't because you can't be black anymore, you're an African American. Anyway, I know 2 South Africans have done that also because obviously white people. That's a separate topic. But I got this list of words I couldn't use, like I couldn't use the word mankind for my thesis because it had the word man in it. So I wrote them back because I'm a stickler. That's what you get from learning too much Talmud. I said, how come I can use the word humanity? The word man is also in that word. Because I went to Vassar, and the feminists at Vassar would write woman this way. And say things like, when God created man, she was only joking. Because you don't want the word man and the word woman. Okay? So that kind of stuff. Anyway, but guys, but the whole idea, the problem I have with multiculturalism and the politically correct thing is when it spills into morality. Because not only it's not about your clothing and your taste in food, it becomes about your values. Your values can't be better or worse than my values, because all values are the same. Guys, that is the most neo-paganistic idea that you could ever have. I'm not talking about religiously. In terms of everything goes, because there's no absolute standard, that is completely antithetical to everything Judaism believes. Because here's the sentence for the class, guys. Judaism is history's most politically incorrect idea, period. What's the essential statement we were saying to the world for 2,000 years? You're wrong. Try saying that in a university unless you're a Republican. In which case you're always wrong. No, seriously. You can't say that to anyone anymore. Because we have always believed, there's a great line in 1984. I'm sure Abraham said it in ancient Aramaic, whatever language he was speaking, many, many times, even though it appears in George Orwell's book 1984. Who read 1984? I read it before 1984. I thought that was so far in the future. And Winston Smith, the hero in this, it's an anti-utopian novel. Like there's 3 anti-utopian novels. One is Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. One is that book, and by 1984 by what's the third one? See if you know. It's a Russian book. It's by Eugene Zamyatin. It's called Oui. Anyway, no one knows that one because it's a Russian one. But remember, Winston Smith is the hero, and he's one of the last free-thinking guys in the totalitarian police state, and they eventually break him. Out of his mouth comes a line that is so Jewish and really explains everything. He says there are truths and there are untruths, and just because you're in a minority of one doesn't make you wrong. That is the Jewish statement. That reality is not a popularity contest. Everyone's values are not equal. And it's amazing how people are obsessed with this. There's a professor by the name of Alan Bloom. Alan Bloom was one of the earliest neoconservative professors in America. The neocons originally, because it's radical conservative new thinking, almost all former Jewish radicals. By the way, I'll tell you something about radical personalities. If they go one way, they go the other way just as extremely. They go from one side to the other. So Alan Bloom, who died in his 40s of a heart attack, was a professor at the University of Chicago, not your typical neoconservative. He was openly gay, which is not what you associate with conservatives. He wrote a book called The Closing of the American Mind, all the way back in like the 1980s, and he saw everything coming. Look at the quote. It's great. He totally nails the problem that you get with multiculturalism and politically correct stuff. He says there's one thing that a professor can be absolutely certain of, and then you especially in the East Coast of America, by the way, where liberal professors outnumber conservatives by what number? I believe it's 28-1. Okay? Almost every student entering university believes or says he believes that truth is relative. The danger they, meaning the students, have been taught to fear from absolutism is not error but intolerance. Meaning, this is a quote you got to explain. It's like, it's not that you're wrong, it's I don't want to hear your opinion because you don't agree with mine. The true believer is the real danger. It is open, meaning this politically correct, is open to all kinds of men, all kinds of lifestyles, all ideologies. There is no enemy other than the man who is not open to anything. Or as G.K. Chesterton, the British author, said 100 years ago, it's such a great quote. He said, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And that's exactly the same quote, he just does it in one sentence. But this is the idea that you have to, by the way, I speak on a lot of university campuses. It is insane what is going on in university campuses in America. As a matter of fact, Vassar, which has one school I went to, is one of the biggest BDS schools in America. We contacted, because we all stopped giving, I don't give a lot of money, but a lot of big donors stopped giving money because they're so intolerant. We contacted the head of the BDS movement as to why they're disrupting a meeting that was discussing Israel. Like they come in and just disrupt it. His line was, listen to this, here's what he said to me. Sometimes you have to shut the opposition up so the truth will come out. That's only an extreme leftist could come up with a slogan like that and actually think that it makes sense. It's like crazy stuff. But you have to be open to everything, except the person who's open to everything, and otherwise you have a right to your opinion as long as it agrees with mine. It's a crazy world. It's antithetical what Judaism believes. I once had this, by the way. Rabbi Weinberg also, I think he saw it coming 30 years plus ago. When I sat in the Essentials class as a student, when it was called the Beginners Program, you have to like mark it with a more catchy title. Now it's the Essentials. Every class, he taught a class that never got into. I dropped out of the class after like 2 weeks because we never got past the first 10 minutes because the newest drop-in guy in the class would always get into an argument with Rabbi Weinberg about absolute truth. And he'd go, there's no such thing as absolute truth. And Rabbi Weinberg would say, are you sure? And he'd go, yes. He goes, are you absolutely sure? He goes, I'm absolutely sure. He goes, well, at least you believe in one truth. Absolute, He's so unsure of one thing. And I remember having a discussion once with a girl on a university campus about this. I talked about when the British, who were, of course, not necessarily the best empire in the world, but a lot better than the Mongols or the Romans, because they were a Christian empire. They were pretty arrogant and horrible, but they had red lines, because they had like sort of Judeo-Christian values. When the British came to India in the late 18th century, one of the first things the British outlawed when they conquered India is the Hindu ritual of sati. What is sati? Sati is when a man dies, you throw the widow alive into the funeral pyre and burn her alive. And the justification is she doesn't want to live without her husband, but there's a lot of socioeconomic stuff going on in there about who gets the... Come on, give me a break. A girl's actually telling me the British had no right to do that. I said back to her, because I was in no mood to listen to this idiocy, I said, that's because you're not the widow. Can you imagine? She'd suddenly be the biggest supporter of the Queen going. But guys, this is essentially the problem going on, and we can understand that. It's not when I say neo-paganistic, it's not a religious thing, the multiculturalism. It's just the idea that anything goes, you have to be open and tolerant to everything. What's the problem with that, by the way? What's the real problem with that? Yeah.
If everything goes, then you don't have anything to stand up for.
Yeah, you can't. There's nothing you can erase. Nothing. Forget that John Lennon song, which is the worst song ever written. Is Imagine. It is the best, worst song ever written. Is that song? Like no differences. Everything's the same. What woman wants to be told by her husband or her boyfriend, "I love you like I love everyone else in the world"? Come on, she's going to smack you in the face and walk out. It'll be a break. She wants to think she's special. Go read Zev Magen, who wrote a book. I think it's John Lennon and the Jews, and he starts off with that song, and he's a leftist Israeli journalist who just goes blast that song to pieces. But it is completely antithetical to everything that Judaism believes about reality, and the biggest problem with it is it makes it impossible to call something good, good, and evil, evil. It's all just about your point of view on it. And Dave, one more analogy and then close with a quick story. I used to do a lot of TV work for the BBC. and radio work for them. I do great sound bites, so they loved using me for stuff. And I always say the BBC, when they do documentary, stands for Best British Creativity. And when they do news, it's biased British crap usually. But I got in a big fight with them because after the Second Intifada, where 1,000 Israelis were killed, I know 6 people killed in terrorist attacks. Personally, I know 6 people killed in bombings. And I wrote to them and said, why won't the BBC ever call anything a terrorist attack? And they go back, we'd like to maintain an objective opinion because one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, which is the classic PC line that everyone uses. And therefore, we're not going to make a value judgment. So I wrote back in my typical pithy way. I said, no one who blows themselves up in a pizzeria in Jerusalem is doing it as a recreational sport. All terrorists are ideologically motivated. But when you target civilians, regardless of your motive, you are always a terrorist. But remember Irving Kristol's definition of a liberal is a conservative who hasn't been mugged by reality. So fast forward to 1995, I think it was, when they attacked the British mass transportation system. Remember they killed, like 56 Brits were killed in bombings? What do you think every other word out of the BBC reporter's mouth was? Terrorist attack. When he's killing you, he's a militant or a freedom fighter. When he's killing me, he's a terrorist. But guys, try making a case for Israel. I'm telling you, this is, you see, try calling, no, it's just your narrative. Go to university campus in America and try and talk about this. That's your point of view. I said, no, there are truths and there are untruths. There are facts. There's a reality. But it all stems from the reemergence of the neo-paganistic moral worldview that politically correct multiculturalism has brought into the world. But what's the saddest part of this whole story? It's a huge problem. By the way, the Mishnah in Sota, which is the only prophecy in the entire oral law in a Mishnah, is in the 9th parak of Sota. It says, before the Messiah comes, it's a great statement. Truth will be absent. And that is a far greater problem than radical Islam, is the ability to say something is true or false, right and wrong, or in an absolute way. It's antithetical. But just to end with one story, because I got to end with a good story here, anecdote you could think about on Shabbat, that really illustrates this point. And it's from CNN's website. I remember when it happened, going back about 14 years ago. There's this highest-ranking Supreme Court justice in the state of Alabama is a guy named Roy Moore, still around. He's an old-school Baptist. I know people who know him. He's not one of the new pro-Israel evangelical guys. He's a bit of an anti-Semite, I've been told. But he's a very religious guy. And he put you can see on the back, the statue of the Ten Commandments in the Alabama State Supreme Court building. Now, lest you think, by the way, this is a problem, and someone did, they figured it was a violation of what? Church and state. First of all, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but that was not what the Founding Fathers had in mind. It says right in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator. Church and state is this freedom of conscience. Worship whatever God you like. There's no state religion. But it's not about no God in America. If you think this is weird and extreme, what do you think is on the actual doors of the Supreme Court chamber in the United States in Washington, D.C.? The luchot, the tablets of the Ten Commandments are engraved into the wood of the door, and the statues on the top of the building, the central one is Moses holding the Ten Commandments. But some like over-the-top, liberal, this is crazy stuff, challenged this. The judge refused to remove the statue. It made its way all the way up to the court system, to the United States Supreme Court. You know, the building with the tablets on the doors. I wonder if they noticed that when they're going in to plead the case. And who do you think took the case for the plaintiff? The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, and the Southern Poverty Law Center. These are centers that who staffs these kind of places? These are usually very idealistic lawyers who put aside, you know, it's like being an attorney general or something. You don't do it for the money. You do it because you love justice and you want to do the right thing. And you know, so look at quote number 12. We'll end on this. It's great. CNN website, November 14th, 2003, Montgomery, Alabama. Alabama's Judicial Ethics Panel removed Chief Justice Roy Moore from office Thursday for defying a federal judge's order to move the Ten Commandments monument from the state Supreme Court building. Richard Cohen. By the way, the other lawyer was Joel Sogel. He was from the ACLU. Richard Cohen, a lawyer. This is like so great. His only name could have been Moshe Cohen, you know. A lawyer for the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the groups that sued Moore over the monument, said the organization would seek to have Moore disbarred. Take away his license to practice law. And here's Moore, sounding just like Mattatyahu ben Yochanan Cohen Gadol, Mattathias, the father of Judah Maccabee, when he kills the Greek and triggers the Maccabean revolt. You know, he says, even if the whole world goes after idolatry, I and my children and my children's children will worship the God of Israel forever. It's a famous line in the book of the Maccabees. Look what the Judge Moore says. God has chosen this time and this place so that we can save our country and save our courts for our children. Guys, you realize how amazing this is? What's the saddest part of this whole story? I heard it's, yeah.
going to say a Jew is the one.
Yeah, a well-intended Jew with that great, you guys were in the class on Driven, with that great Jewish soul that wants justice and is always, Jews for every ism but Judaism, that wants to fix the world, but with no Torah software, thinking like a pagan but with a drive like a Jew, is pushing an agenda that's antithetical to Judaism and is sounding like the Greeks in the Hanukkah story. And I remember, I don't know who said it, but it's a great quote. He said, America was made great, and the greatness of America, besides having God we trust on the money, he said, America was made great by a bunch of non-Jews who believed in Jewish values, and is largely being destroyed by a bunch of Jews who believe in non-Jewish values. And the big lesson for that, by the way, for us practically, is that these people are all well-intended people. But you got to get Jews for Judaism, because Jews for Judaism is not to preserve the tribe and not give Hitler a posthumous victory. But guys, just as we, Abraham, the first Jew by choice, brought a value system into the world that radically transformed the whole human race, our whole concept of God and history and morality, the world today needs it really in many ways just as badly. And Jews for Judaism make amazing human beings for the human race. But you got to have that software. So guys, let's hope we got some Jewish unity and proactivity and focus on what we're really supposed to be doing in this world, which is fixing the world from the Jewish perspective, and then we won't have to deal with problems like this. Guys, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Again, everything in this class comes primarily from World Perfect. Usually I say everything I do in this class comes from my other book I wrote, which I always whip out a copy of at the end, because it's such a great history book. Ask my mother, she'll taste the best one ever written. But all my stuff is online, including Torah Anytime is filming all this. So you can actually watch it all again. And where's my business cards? They all fell out. Oh, I seem to have lost my business card. Sorry? My business cards fell out, but I have a great website, guys, which is kenspiro.com. Very easy to remember. And all my content is there. You can listen, read, or watch it for free online. Guys, have a Shabbat Shalom. I will see you, God willing. I'm going to be here next week, even though it's before Pesach. I will be here on Sunday and Thursday at 2:10, unless Mashiach comes first, in which case we're going to have the most awesome Passover celebration with the Kohanim working up there, slaughtering thousands of goats and sheep before. It'll be unbelievable. Hopefully we'll live to see it.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.